I'm sorry to say this, but I think we've been too hard on the Afrikaner refugees. My eyes and bleeding liberal heart have now been opened to the absolute tragedy, the suffering, the pain that these poor bastards have had to endure, mainly thanks to this book, which is The Virgins by Jillian Becker. I bought this back in high school because it was on the list of banned apartheid fiction, and I couldn't figure out what was seemingly a pretty harmless young adult novel could do to deserve such censorship. It's set in 1970 South Africa, and it's just a coming-of-age story about a wealthy white teenage girl in Johannesburg. And in between the very beautifully written accounts of the dizzying anxiety and fear and thrill of adolescence, with its misguided crushes, changing hormones, and that desperate rush to the big real world adulthood promises, which, in retrospect, that's right. There are also some of the most revealing and fascinating insights into the white psyche during apartheid South Africa. Annie Furman, our protagonist, is from a very well-off family. She's attending Rodin, which even back then was a very expensive private school, living on one of those giant Houghton estates with a swimming pool, tennis court, and at any point at a time, at least 4 full-time domestic staff, which I'm pretty sure includes like a butler, there's a laundry maid, a general housekeeper, and all of this on the single income of her doctor father. And what we have here is a typical day in the life of a white housewife in apartheid. While Annie's mother is an English-speaking woman, I can't imagine her experience is vastly different from that of a rich Afrikaans woman of the time. Mrs. Furman did not come downstairs until 11, but she was very busy between her 7 o'clock tea and her descent. In addition to breakfast, they also came to her room, generally on different days, the masseuse, twice a week, the beautician, twice, Mrs. Ringer to fit the simpler dresses, dressing gowns, or alterations, 3 or 4 days in a row each month, the chiropodist, occasionally, the manicurist, once a week for a few months only while the hairdresser she went to on Saturdays was short of staff, and sometimes the doctor. At 11, dressed and combed with her face on, she would bring the telephone down, which she had used for her morning calls from bed, and which was now to be made available to Susan, that's the housekeeper, for orders to the butcher and the grocer. She would plug the thing in, a hard, sharp, firm plack, followed by a tiny ping, tap across the polished floor of the hall, and then came the dragging sound of the sliding doors as she shut herself into the lounge for the morning with a headache. Sometimes she would ring for a jug of ice. Next on the agenda would be lunch. Because they were linen mats instead of a cloth, and because the lunch was light, as she was dieting to become slim, Mrs. Furman called it picnicking. They had noodles in runny tomato sauce, or curried meat with cakes of snow-white rice, or minced fish balls fried in breadcrumbs, and a side dish of tomatoes or asparagus or mushrooms, and a dessert of stewed fruit or jelly and cream, followed by fruit served on plates with a raised pattern of purple plums and dark green leaves. The fruit knives and forks were like the fish knives and forks, with the same ivory handles and chased metal, only narrower. In the glass finger bowls, there were slices of lemon so thin you could see through them. Then there was coffee in little cups drunk at the table. Then Mrs. Furman stamped on the brass button, which was set on the floor under the table, and lunch was over. And then the whole house died. Mrs. Furman went for her lie-down in her pink bedroom, first stripping out the plug of the telephone again and carrying the instrument with her, balanced on one hand, though she wouldn't plug it in up there until 4 o'clock. And in the other hand, she carried a fruit plate with a knife and a green apple on it, and under her arm the detective story she had been reading in the morning, Agatha Christie or Ellery Queen, which was rubbish that she only read for relaxation. What she really liked was Shakespeare, Balzac, Dante, and Homer. Once her husband returned home from work, then this would be followed by a formal dinner with her family, then playing piano and drinking until bed. And that's how this woman spent every day of her life. It is actually at one of these dinners when Annie's parents are discussing the color problem and how without it, South Africa would be a paradise, as if for them it wasn't already so. It's especially funny because Annie's parents consider themselves quite liberal. They frequently lament about the plight of the native people and how they wish for an equal society, while they're constantly doted on by a procession of underpaid black servants. The same people who, while Annie and her mom are having that spectacular lunch, would finish the washing up quickly. Meat would have been carried out along with a pot of millie meal to the palisaded yard, where they'd sit among the dustbins on fruit boxes and stones. They had thick slices of brown bread on a tin plate soaked through with peach jam. They dipped old-looking spoons, spotty as though they were peeling, into the 2 pots of millie meal and stewed meat. They always finished every scrap of it. But the bottom of the porridge was usually burnt, and the lumps were scraped out with a long iron spoon into a dustbin, except on Mondays when Hannah, that's the laundry maid, would unwind a cloth from her head and tie up the cold, white, yellow, brown, and black lumps safely for carrying home. And the stark difference between the experience of black and white wasn't lost on anyone. If the talk was about politics, as it often was, Mrs. Furman always said, "One feels so helpless in this dreadful situation. The important thing is to treat those immediately about one decently and considerately, regardless of color." Never mind that this is the same woman who refers to all African languages as Zulu, constantly accuses the staff of theft, and loves to address the female help, the adult female help, as either that stupid girl, creature, or most affectionately, slut. One of my favorite parts is when they have a repairman come over to fix their geyser and everyone is freaking out because they can't figure out where he's going to have his lunch, since as a colored man, he can't sit with the black workers. And obviously just letting him have lunch in the house is not even a possibility. That's where the actual people eat. Don't be crazy. At the time, a critic praised this novel for how it depicted the vicious lethargy of middle-class life. And while that's quite true, once you realize that living in a sprawling estate with servants and private school money made you middle class in this period, I can fully appreciate why anything remotely approaching equity in post-apartheid South Africa feels like a war zone. I refuse to even dignify the concept of white genocide by presenting all the very many ways in which that's actually factually and contractually untrue. And I think at this point, if you genuinely buy into the idea that a group of people who've spent decades luxuriating and profiting off the exploitation, displacement, and alienation of people of color have now had those tables turned on them, then I can only ask that you'll give Henry Kissinger a kiss from me when you're in hell. But what I will dignify is that compared to this, these people are suffering today. Do they qualify as refugees? No. Do they deserve asylum? Absolutely not. Am I happy they're gone? Yes. What can I say? I'm a huge proponent of white flight. I think that if to this day you can look around yourself in a country cited as one of the most unequal in the world and still feel like you are burdened by some grand injustice as if everyone is treating you unfairly, then I hope you have a great time in Australia or now America, which famously has such great healthcare and access to resources, right? And I don't know how intentional this was on Jillian Becker's part, because for the most part, this is just a very lovely light read about being 15 and somebody tells you they love you. And possibly some of the most accurate descriptions I've seen of what a Joburg afternoon feels like. Like, I've never seen someone else capture the exact gold tinge to the city that settles around in the afternoon when you're in the suburbs, or the exact like vibe and feeling and aura of like driving through a suburban street with a bunch of jacarandas and all these weird old houses with their big front yards and their high gates. But that being said, I can see why this book was censored. There's quite a bit of very biting commentary about the hypocrisy and most of all the delusion of middle to upper class white South Africans under the regime. I imagine that Becker's personal background factored into this. Her father had founded the anti-apartheid Progressive Party, and once she'd moved to the UK after graduating from Wits, she specialized in writing about terrorism with books on left-wing groups in Germany and Palestine in the 70s and 80s. I think she also founded like the British Terrorism Research Unit or something. She also became best friends with Sylvia Plath in this time, and one of her last pieces of fiction is actually about the author's death. And I don't really want to get into all those rumors I've heard about Sylvia Plath being a raging racist, because I really enjoy the bell jar and I don't want to think too deeply about it. I didn't really want to bother doing any more research into this, but I did find some criticism or pushback from Palestinian organizations about how she has reported and handled the subject matter, and there's also some like claims that she's lied about certain things. But in the present day, she is now the managing editor of a publication called The Atheist Conservative, which, from the most precursory of scans, is... it's something. I think the best thing I can say is that it's true to its name. I don't know, maybe I'm just really naive, but all of that was not what I was expecting after reading this. And I was also kind of curious because according to her LinkedIn, she also attended Rodin as well. So I'm imagining that like Annie Furman is kind of a self-insert character, and that there are going to be more parallels between the two of them than just the schools they attended. Like in the book, Annie is often frustrated at the way information is kept from her. She asks a history teacher at one point why the Armenians are being targeted when they're learning about the genocide, and when she doesn't receive an answer, she adds it to the long list of things you're not supposed to talk about. And you get the sense that, considering that Becker would go on to be like a journalist and someone, actively seeking truth, that the nature of like being in school in this time was a lot of sort of secrecy, or a lot of hush hush, or a lot of like, we don't talk about those things, or don't ask too many questions. But then, considering what I have seen from the atheist conservative, it seems that Julian resembles her mother character anything more than sort of this very curious and empathetic young woman that's our main character. I guess it's one of those like die a hero or live as a villain situations, I guess, because Annie's mother is a nothing person. I don't know if I've met a character in fiction that I absolutely hate more. She's a housewife with not even a single clue about how to run a household, care for her child, or contribute anything of value and substance to the world around her. I can't imagine there is a single person in this book who can say that their lives are even a percentage better by knowing her. Not even her dumbass fuck-ass husband. And as I'd mentioned, I've had this book for over a decade, but I only read it recently because after a lot of hard work, I've finally achieved a grade 4 level of literacy. But I'm also really happy I've read it right now in this current climate and context, because Mrs. Furman's life, this idea of domestic middle-class bliss, is the kind of nonsense that trad wives and conservatives are trying to push right now on TikTok and Instagram. Like, when I was reading about how she spent her day, I'm kind of reminded of a lot of those like day in the life vlogs from social media influencers, especially of the lifestyle variety, that always feel like sinking your brain into a very deep, warm bath. You just watch these people leading these very jam-packed lives of waiting for packages, making a very big lunch, and then sitting in the computer clicking away for a couple of seconds and just being like, wow, yeah, I'm just absolutely so overwhelmed. And I'm not trying to be mean, because at least those people are much better than Mrs. Furman, because the content creation aspect of it all is still actually work. But I'm just always like shocked at how much these people are kind of spending a lot of time not really doing much, but like they're busy. And it kind of makes me wonder if there's any part of right-wing America, particularly those who are so desperate to return to this imagined past where women didn't have to work and women didn't work, and that managing a household was so simple, you had ample time to spend in front of a mirror, who recognize that actually for many white South African women, this was very real. This wasn't fantasy. This wasn't propaganda. This was their daily reality. And I think maybe that could be something that's made them so sympathetic to the Afrikaner cause. Like, it's a version they want to connect to. And even now, with all of that, I can see why these refugees have such a sense of entitlement and resentment, though it's incredibly misplaced, of course. It's not just that they had a utopia taken away from them, but also that they have to confront the fact that their government and that their version of reality was a huge joke and a lie, and that actually they're not superior, they're not more hardworking, and they're not deserving. Everything they have is the result of taking from other people, and that is a difficult thing to confront. And any failures that they presently face are now fully their own. And much in the same way that apartheid couldn't continue as it was, partly because it was not really feasible, and then also a lot of it because of all that pesky revolting those blacks were getting up to, I think it just really shows that there is no greater emptiness than living like a god. There's a part here where Annie kind of gets to how much of a void she's living in, what it actually means to have heaven without humanity, where she's like, you could glimpse the neighbor's garden, but never a neighbor or even a gardener, though the lawns were always mown and the urns full of the season's flowers. Perhaps the gardener worked at night. It's such a pathological paradox. Like, all the beauty around you isn't possible without people, and subconsciously part of you definitely understands this, right? That's why Mrs. Furman can sigh and frown about the color problem, but she lives in this like violently constructed reality where everything around her only serves to continue to confirm that the only valid experience is her own, and anything beyond that doesn't matter. I mean, this is like a throwaway line from page 15, but I thought it was really poignant. You have to look through your own reflection to see the real things. Towards the end of the novel, Annie's matriculating high school, and then she's rationalizing heartbreak with her best friend. Oh, actually, I've kind of skipped over a lot of what is the plot of the book, but just because I found the mother character so fascinating. But there's a whole thing where she falls in love with this much older man who like initially came over to her house to photograph her mom and the home, I think for like a house and leisure kind of magazine. Think very architectural digest, like 71 questions with Vogue Times. And he spends months sending love letters to her high school before he ends up dumping her for another rich white teenager. So obviously it's first heartbreak, first love, gotta happen, charge to the game, keep moving. So she's sitting with her best friend Barbara. They've just finished high school and they have the future on the horizon, and now they get to do anything they want. And they're talking about marriage and university and whether they're going to follow in their mother's footsteps of becoming really well-educated, well-mannered furniture. I must say, I can't even imagine the man I'd care to be tied to for life and have to look at every day for 70 years. Being a wife isn't my idea of living. That's only because you haven't fallen in love. Perhaps falling in love is just a biological trick to make us reproduce our species. I don't like babies. I don't see dressing up in a bridal veil and carrying a bunch of lilies as the happiest possible climax of my life. I'd rather become a lawyer or something, or even a teacher. I want to travel and meet different kinds of people. Do you mean you'd never get married? Well, sometimes I thought how dreadful it would be to have to live the lives our mothers do. Imagine us having houses like yours or mine and lying in bed till 11 every morning and doing nothing but having our hair done and buying clothes and playing bridge and giving dinner parties for years and years and ever and ever. It would do the same to us as it's done to them. Imagine being as bored and ratty as your mother, or as bored and silly as mine, and ordering servants around while we go yapping about being humane and aware of other people and doing what one can in one's own little circle. And then firing people from their jobs just because you want to save 10 shillings a week when you're so rich you've never even had to wash your own knickers, and you buy at least 6 new dresses every month and get diamonds on your birthdays. Stupid. Insipid. Futile. Despicable. So yeah, that's been The Virgins. And if you're curious, there is one less virgin by the end of it. And whatever the author's politics are, I do think everyone should give this a read. I was hoping to get the experience of like what it would like to be a teenager in this time. I feel like a lot of apartheid fiction or fiction set in this time is quite concerned with like the political movements and the activism, which is really important. But I think there is something really valuable about also just the mundane everyday experience of normal people and understanding what the reality is like to live in a system like this. Like, you can hear about all of the atrocities and things that went on in this time, and you can, like, at face value, rationalize and understand and connect. But it is something to really understand what it's like to just feel as you are a normal everyday person in this and exist in this really weird situation and trying to get into understanding what people like that were experiencing. Like, I think as I'm getting older, I'm like wanting to empathize with people I don't like more, or people with whom I hold a lot of contempt. And it kind of reminds me of like, there's like a part from Ender's Game, the book, where he talks about how like, you know, the more you understand your enemy, the more you have no choice but to love them. And I just think it's also very important to recognize that like a lot of evil things happen, but not because there's a lot of evil people, you know, like, I forgot who's that lady, but she was talking about how, like, some of the people who've done the worst war crimes and the most heinous things ever are really boring, dull people. And I think it's also just important to get that experience as well. I also just feel like this has radicalized me much more than any of the things that I was assigned in high school. Most of that also just being because I hated that book, Disgraced by J.M. Coetzee. Like, as if puberty wasn't bad enough, I had to read through that. But that might also be because I was the only black girl in a very predominantly white high school. So that whole experience sucked. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this. If you've liked this video, you can like this video or dislike it. I don't give a shit. I think from now on, I'm just gonna start talking about books only. I have been incredibly like burnt out and stressed and overwhelmed recently, and I think just because I've given myself too much on my plate, and also I feel like I have overloaded myself with a lot of things that don't bring me joy. Just the current way I've been doing things, I don't enjoy the way people speak to me on the internet. It's starting to piss me off. And I feel like a good answer to that would just be like showing everyone that I can read and that I do research stuff. But also I have decided that I'd rather just focus on talking about book stuff, because I am kind of working on a much bigger research project, and this is a really great way to optimize all my like reading and researching time, so that I'm kind of getting the most out of it. So I kind of feel like I'm fulfilling what I want to do with content stuff, but then I'm also, meeting all my other milestones. And it's so much easier to just talk about like one little text than it is to sit around reading like thousands of different papers and books and then trying to put it all together in a really well written essay or whatever. Like I'm over it. And I think I'd rather save all of those things for like one day when I eventually, I don't know, write a book or make a documentary or publish a really cool fantasy video game, whatever it is. But if you'd like to support me, you're welcome to become a member of my Patreon, where you're going to get more videos like this, and I will also be sharing like journal articles and academic papers, and also doing kind of this format with them, and then those will be available there. I also just need to be, I'm probably gonna have to think a little bit carefully about copyright stuff, but that's it. Also on my Patreon, you'll also have access to my other research, updates, behind the scenes stuff, as well as access to my PDF sewing patterns. The lowest tier is free, by the way, so if you are broke, just say that. You're also welcome as well to make a one-time tip of any amount of your choice to my Buy Me a Coffee account. On Instagram and TikTok, I am at OKBaddyK, and you can also subscribe to my Substack, which I rarely update because I love to be a writer who doesn't write, but that's called Hanger Management. And yeah, that's been me. Barbs, stay in school. Basically, this funny part where the previous wash called Martha simply stopped coming. Mrs. Furman was furious to be let down like that, and when Susan said that perhaps she had died, Mrs. Furman said she wasn't interested in excuses. It's like fucking sucks. Can I sit here, please? Thank you. Ugh. I'm sorry, there's like nothing scarier than watching a cat open a door. Why do you know how to do that? You don't have thumbs.